My guest today is Jennifer Cramer-Miller, who is a writer, speaker, wellness mentor, and gratitude advocate. In today's episode, Jennifer and I talk about her memoir, Incurable Optimist, Living with Illness and Chronic Hope, which shares how she managed uncertainty to create a beautiful life, and she shines a bright light on people who help others through difficult times, because sometimes it's the sorrows threatening to break us which ultimately unite us in hope. Welcome to Lifeology.
Thank you so much, James. I am delighted to be here with you today.
Well, I am as well, with the last name like Miller. I mean, you got to be pretty good, right?
I know. We're already just perfect pals.
Your publicist, Caitlin Hamilton, fantastic woman. I'd highly recommend her. She sent me your book, and I immediately was like, I need to know more about this, because you're like me, you're this internal optimist, and so at times it can be hard to continue to have optimism when life happens. So walk us through this. At age 22, everything was in front of you. The world was bright. And what happened?
Right. So 22, I was happy, healthy, normal girl, like normal. Had just graduated from college, and I got a business degree and a psychology minor. And I lived in Seattle, had this cute apartment with my best friend, and all was going well. I was just ready to launch. And then I just woke up one day and my eyes felt puffy and I felt sort of tired and kind of out of it. And eventually I just went to a doctor thinking, okay, maybe I have a flu or a virus, something normal, something with a quick fix, like you always think you have. And I quickly learned that I had protein in my urine, and there is no reason protein should be in your urine. That means you have kidney damage. So I was told that I needed to have a biopsy to find out the cause and extent of this mysterious out of the blue kidney damage. And at that point, when the biopsy word got thrown out, which scary word for a 22-year-old, scary for anybody, but I just thought that must mean cancer. I had no idea what that was going to mean. My parents wanted me to come home and get the biopsy in Minneapolis, because my dad, who is a custom home builder, built a house for a nephrologist. So he said, I know Dr. Brown, let's get him on the case. So I did have the biopsy in Minneapolis and quickly heard two words I wish I had never heard, which were incurable and progressive. And I learned I had an autoimmune kidney disease that's very stubborn. And within 6 months, I had kidney failure.
Wow. First off, thank you for sharing that. I can't imagine to have to, I'm sure you've told it many times, but I'm sure there's still some pain there that comes along with that. So I really want to honor that story. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. At 22, as you said, you're on top of the world. And, for any of us, we could wake up with puffy eyes. I told you just recently, I had a viral infection and it knocked me out for quite a while. And so I can't imagine, for you to hear this incurable, progressive disease. What was that like for you the journey real quickly as 22, and then within the 6 months or however long it was, all of a sudden your life completely changed. How did you navigate that?
Not that well. Like I was pretty depressed. I wasn't feeling like an incurable optimist at that point in time. Yeah. I felt a couple of things, like I'd been ripped from my rightful place in the world, but I also felt, maybe because I was so young, that somehow I would get out of this. I just thought, what I really thought is I'll eventually have a transplant. I'll go back to my life in Seattle. So I was really operating off the assumption this was temporary, not tragic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can see that, because that's still, when we look at the stages of grief. So the first one's denial. So I hear some denial in there, and I would be the same way, of course, but that is that aspect of, yes, I'm young. There has to be, something. Incurable doesn't literally mean incurable. It means for now. Yep. And I can see that. So how was it for you though, when it progressed and you realized it really wasn't incurable?
Well, when that really happened was I went on dialysis, which is not a great thing to be on, but it kept me alive, and I thought I'm going to get the transplant. So I eventually did get a transplant. It was a year and 8 months on dialysis. Oh. And just for your listeners who might not know what dialysis is, it's an artificial kidney machine that keeps you alive when your kidneys don't work. It's the only way to survive.
I heard it's really painful too.
It's not, well, there's some big needles involved, and it has some crazy effects, but it's not literally painful, but it's kind of a painful way to live in an emotional way. But when I did get that first transplant, I thought, okay, this is it. This is my train ride back to my future. And it was really wonderful for 3 days. And then after the third day, I had recurrence of FSGS, which is the name. It's a very long name. I'll give you FSGS. instead of
Sure.
focal segmental glomerular sclerosis, but it came
Oh
back after
gosh.
3 days, recurrence. I didn't even know that was a possibility. And so at that point, I really got hit by a hammer knowing, oh no, I'm not going to escape this. This is something I'm going to have to deal with forever. So, yeah, go ahead and ask
Yeah.
your
Well,
question.
once again, as I hear this, when I heard you say the word three, I was saying, okay, like probably 3 years. But then to hear 3 days, though, I can't imagine how quickly or how painful that was to have your hopes crushed so quickly.
Yeah, I wrote in my book that I couldn't handle the thought, so I had to just make the television screen in my head go blank. Like I just had to
Mm,
it was so immense to think about that in a life journey kind of way that I just had to go numb and allow myself. I was still in the hospital. I wasn't even out of the hospital.
mm,
So I was, it was really, really a hard thing. And my nephrologist told me that, he managed my expectations in a way that now I greatly appreciate because we're
yeah.
3 decades later. I'm in my 50s now, but he told me that I should always regard a transplant as a vacation from dialysis. And the reason that that's
Oh,
helpful, I
wow.
think, for any patient who has kidney failure is you do have two modalities to stay alive. You're either going to be on dialysis or you're going to have a transplant. Those are your
Mhm.
options. And I just realized, okay, I'm going to appreciate every day I have with this transplant. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know if it's 6 months or 6 years, but however long it is, I really owe it to the family that they
Mm,
had, somebody in a family said yes to organ donation. And I was the
wow.
person who received this kidney. So I realized, okay, I am here, I am alive, and I owe somebody this. Somebody gave me
Yeah.
this great gift. And it's very confusing. I think that intersection of life and death when
Hmm.
especially then I was 25 at that point,
Yeah.
I felt a sense of responsibility to make my life the best I could with the gift I'd been given.
I'm sure hearing that from the doctor, it probably didn't sound as like the best in bedside manner, but retrospectively, obviously you understand that. As you said, the intersection between life and death. So you had this grief of this is how life is going to be, but then all of a sudden that transition of I have the responsibility. Was there a specific thought or a specific action or something that happened to make you find that switch?
Yeah, there was a couple of things. I started to really pay attention to everything that was
Hmm.
going on. And like one time, I remember I was at a theater with my mom and my brother seeing a movie, and I think this was like I was in the midst of kidney failure at this point. And it was a funny movie, and I was laughing at the movie. And I just really like took stock. I was like, no matter what's going on, I can laugh. Like I love
Mm,
that I'm laughing right now.
yeah.
And so I started just appreciating the good things. And I kind of developed what I call my lucky list. So I
Mm,
would think, okay, yes, I am having medical problems, but I still have the ability to laugh and I still have
hmm.
my family and I still have my friends. And I really started to kind
Yeah.
of curate the things I had that I felt lucky about. And then there was another really kind of instrumental moment for me when I was on dialysis and I was with patients who are mostly, they were elderly patients. And I was like the young gal at dialysis. And eventually I tell people it was kind of like a medical version of Cheers, where I'd go in and everybody knows your name. We had like surprisingly good camaraderie with this group
Yeah,
of
I'm
people who
sure.
had to be there. But there was
Yeah.
a very young technician. He's probably 33. His name was Tom. And he was just the picture of health. And he helped all
Mm,
these elderly patients and they loved him and I loved him. And one day I came in to the unit and everyone was sad and I didn't know what had happened. And I learned Tom had died the night before.
oh
He
my
had a brain
gosh.
aneurysm.
Oh
And
my
I thought,
gosh.
oh my gosh, how could all of us have outlived Tom? He was so
Yeah.
young and strong and healthy. And I really realized then I knew I was going to face a lot of uncertainty in my life, but I realized we all face uncertainty in our life. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't that unusual. Like we're all in the same boat of being human. We have
Mm,
uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And we really have to savor our lives when we have our lives. That really kind of
yes.
turned me
Wow.
around.
Wow. I'm so sorry to hear that about Tom. I'm sure it was very surprising. As you said, it's the epitome of health. But I want to go back to the aspect of, you said you had your list. So in psychology, we have what's called a dialectic. It's a fancy word that basically means two opposing things could exist at the same time, and they're both true.
Yes.
So, for example, you're very sad, but also you're laughing, at the movie. So
Right.
that doesn't take away from the sadness, you detract from it, but you have both emotions and you experience them 100%, and both are true. And sometimes in life, we think it has to be this or that. So we focus on one thing, not realizing the complexity of our life, of our emotions, of our thoughts.
Yes.
And so I'm really glad you didn't know the word, obviously, but if for people who want to look it up, please do. It's called a dialectic. But for you were able to discover that. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do, because it validates our situation. I'm hurting, I'm in pain, I feel lost, I feel scared, I feel lonely, and I can laugh, I can have joy, I can have peace, I can have all that as well. And I think once we really realize that and capture that in our mind and solidifies, then there are options for us.
Oh my gosh, I've so much learned that, like what you're saying, the dialectic. Okay, you call it that. I really, in my terminology, have discovered it as life is such a mix of beauty and bummers, and there's beauty in the bummers. So, I remember thinking about this a lot just at the beginning of the year when it's a new year. Everyone's like, last year was a bad year. This is going to be a good year. And I don't believe in good years and bad years and good days and bad days. I just think that it's all mixed together. Like every day I wake up, there might be beautiful things and there might be bummers within the same day. And I'm just here to appreciate all of it, because it means you're alive. When you've kind of been on the tightrope of uncertainty and wondering about your survival, illness can be a portal to realizing how precious life is. And it's a difficult portal to go down, but there are some realizations that you really gain from just being so happy to be here.
Yes. We're in today's episode, for those of you just joining in, I'm speaking with Jennifer Cramer-Miller, and we're talking about her book, Incurable Optimist, Living Hope with Illness and Chronic Hope. What happened for you? We're like, I need to write this memoir.
Well, a couple of things. I have a daughter, and my daughter, Liza, was born after I had my second transplant. And which was just an amazing set of circumstances in itself, because again, somebody who checked a box at the DMV gave me the gift of life and then enabled me to create a life. So this kind of this gift keeps on giving. And I wanted Liza to know that she was a miracle. She is a miracle, because my chances of getting pregnancy were not the same as somebody else's. And having a pregnancy was amazing. I would drive around in my car and think, I'm pregnant. I can't believe it.
That's amazing.
And so
awesome.
We had been through so much. And I just thought, what if I get hit by a bus? And Liza never knows what a miracle she is and how lucky we all are to be here together. So I started writing. And then something really lit my fire, which sounds funny, but I credit Ellen DeGeneres and Madonna for this, because I heard them have a conversation where Madonna apparently encouraged Ellen to share her story when Ellen was going to come out. And she told her that if you don't do it, nobody else ever can. It's just yours. And it will leave this earth if you're not the one who tells it. And that just kind of planted a seed in my head and made me a little more urgent. Like, I have to get this on paper and I have to get this out. Yeah. So combination of Liza, Ellen, and Madonna really got me going.
I love that. For those of you who don't know the difference between a memoir and a biography, is a memoir is a person when they write it, or an autobiography rather, it's when the person writes it today, but they write it with the retrospective learning and lesson, kind of gives the backstory of what was actually happening, as opposed to just doing the chronological order that a biography or autobiography would do.
Right.
When you wrote it, what did you, years later, what lessons that were coming out of it that you really rediscovered?
Well, one of the things I found, especially working with a book coach, is I had to dig pretty deep. Like, she advised me, I was doing some drafts and she was going through them, and she said, you've got to be uglier. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? And she said, you went through kidney failure at 22. That had to be hard. And we need to know how hard. And So I really had to dive in. Thank goodness I had kept a lot of journals and kind of spilled a lot of emotions on paper. But
Hmm.
it was hard to go back in and like feel and smell and taste and
Yeah.
see all the things. But it makes it a better memoir. And it was helpful for me to feel like, yeah, I did get through that.
Mm.
I've come out the other side. I still have this incurable disease. I live with it. It's never going to go away, but I do feel like I've reached a place where I can help other people who go through hard
Mm.
things. And so some of it was really hard to write, but it felt really healing in a way. And
I'm sure.
hopefully, I think it'll be healing for other people.
Yes. I want to talk about what you're doing now, but I want to kind of go back for a second. When you wrote it and you had to literally relive the trauma and the pain, was there a time when you almost got lost in that pain again?
While I was working on it, I did. I
Yeah.
would have to kind
Right.
of sit with it for a little bit
Yeah.
and just, but I didn't, I could get myself back out. I didn't like
Sure.
sink into any kind of
Yeah.
depression or anything. I
Hmm.
kept it on the page, but there were times where I really had to just like, especially with my parents, I felt like what they went through with me. Now that I'm a parent, I
Yeah.
kind of had a different perspective of how hard that must have been for them at
Mm.
the time. And so just new perspectives over time. And yeah, I went through sort of an emotional reckoning and
Yeah.
was able to then come out of my office and carry on.
Yeah. Well, we were able to compartmentalize it and keep it there in the past. The other thing that I was curious about is when you wrote it, and you are so far, was it 30 years past it,
Yeah.
30 plus years? Are you surprised at how far you've come and all you've overcome?
I am like, I'm happy about it. I mean, I kind of wish that I could have read my book when I was 22
Mm.
because
Yeah.
I want people who have any kind of incurable diagnosis or just a scary diagnosis, just, stick with it. And chronic hope is in the subtitle of my book. I'm all about hope. I mean, what would we
Yes.
do without hope?
Yeah.
It's such a good fuel for carrying us forward. And so I just, yeah, I feel really lucky. Like somebody said I was the most lucky, unlucky person. I don't take on the unlucky part. I'm not going to
Yeah.
focus on that. I feel like I'm
Sure.
super lucky. And um, I'm really excited how it all turned out.
Yeah. Well,
I have
there's
a
always the
great life.
reframe. Yes, you do. It's always the
Yeah.
reframe as well. So when we think that we're unlucky, it's really how you view a situation. Yeah, I mean, circumstances happen, and of course, it's not the best, but there's always a reframe. And I think if we get lost in the despair of something, we forget the reframe of there are always lessons. And so I always tell people, my viewers and listeners hear this all the time, but every event in our life is like a jigsaw puzzle piece. And if we get stuck in that one jigsaw puzzle piece, we're like, where does this even fit in the grand scheme of things? We don't know. But if you wait a little bit longer, and then the jigsaw puzzle piece matches with another one and another one, and that's where we have the insight and the retrospective. In other words, looking back to say, this makes sense. So in the moment, it doesn't make sense, but
Right.
wait a little bit longer, and you'll find the outcome, and you have the opportunity to either live, like I said, in that despair, or move forward in the direction to how you want your life to be.
Yeah, I had a distinctive moment where I remember. So I had the first transplant, I had recurrence, and I was really inspired by a quote by Joseph Campbell that we must be
Mhm.
willing to let go of the life we've planned and accept the one that waits for us. I think
Mm.
that's pretty close to the quote.
Wow.
I really took that on. Like I thought that makes so much sense. I felt like I was going backward. Like I want to go back to Seattle. I want to go back to where I
Mm.
was. And then I suddenly realized, there could be despair or there can be hope. I wanted to choose
Yeah.
hope. And then I started to move forward. And moving
Mm.
forward is, you go down the flow of the river. You can't fight the current. And so I think
Yeah.
it's very surrendering to what is and seeking acceptance really
Hmm.
makes a difference. I mean,
Yeah.
I really learned that that's what I had to do.
Yeah. One of
And
my
then what
favorite
you
quotes to
said,
piggyback. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say too, what you said about the puzzle piece and getting stuck on
Yeah.
things. I think sometimes we label ourselves in ways
Yeah.
that aren't helpful. Like,
Yes.
I worked with a woman who actually had a brain tumor, and we talked about she labeled herself terminal. She carried this
Mm.
label. everywhere she went. And we worked on like, let go of that label. You're alive and you're with your kids and you're doing things. And I feel like that too. I don't walk around feeling like I wear an illness label or a
Mhm.
chronic disease label. I just don't think that's helpful. So
Yeah.
I think we have to be careful how we label ourselves and shed some of those labels that don't serve us.
That's great. And a situation, an event does not define who we are unless we allow it to.
Yeah.
Well, kind of piggybacking off what you said earlier, one of my favorite quotes is trouble is inevitable, but misery is optional. And so life is going to happen, but what do we do with it? Do we sit in the misery of it, or do we find or do we recognize these are the facts? This is what's happening. I can't change it, but what can I do about it?
Yeah. I love that. I love that because the things that you can control, you have to control.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
so
certainly do.
make your lucky list and figure out what you appreciate. And, there's a lot of triggers for happiness that we can work on. And I think that, movement is one, like moving your body makes you feel
Mm-hmm.
better. I think
Yeah.
connection is huge. I've learned so much about the value of other people because so many people have helped me. And there's a great study. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And it
Mm-hmm.
was started in 1938, where they followed all these people and over the trajectory of their lives to see what was the measure of happiness that they could kind of ascertain as they went through their
Yeah.
lives. And it really became like the number one thing they thought it might be wealth or career status or
Mm-hmm.
it was really close relationships. That's what they found. And that's intuitively so obvious to me. Like my relationships are
Yeah.
so wonderful. Like what would we do without our people?
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's the problem. Through the pandemic, and one of the major contributing factor why people are dying early is because of the loneliness and isolation. So during the pandemic, there was an uptick in, obviously besides the pandemic itself, but the loneliness aspect really contributes to the mortality of people. And I don't think people really realize that connection is so important. Finding your tribe, we all heard that, but it's connecting with people. And so sometimes when we get lost in despair, we isolate. There's nothing wrong with taking time for yourself, but if that becomes a lifestyle, then unfortunately you're separating yourself. And as you said, the connections are so important. If you don't have that, then all you hear is that circular looping thoughts over and over again of your despair. And so the more you hear that, the more you believe it, and that becomes your truth.
Yeah. And I think that like one trigger of happiness is outward focus and service to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I really suggest to anybody, if you're feeling lonely or kind of isolating yourself, or if you have anything going on that feels very hard in your life, which we all do, like help somebody else, reach out, get out of yourself to help somebody else. And it's amazing how you'll benefit that person and you'll benefit yourself as well. I think it's really helpful for us to connect with other people and, like I just said, get outside of yourself.
Yes. Yes. Jennifer, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to speak with you, telling your story. Once again, we honor your story, we honor your grief, your pain, but we also celebrate with you the optimism that you found and what you're giving back to others. Unfortunately, we weren't able to talk about that specifically, but if my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you and to purchase your memoir, Incurable Optimist, Living with Illness and Chronic Hope, where would they find this information online?
Okay, great. So the best website to go to is www.incurable/optimist.com. So you can find the book there, and then you can find out more information about me on my website, jennifercramermiller.com. Kramer is with a C. And then also follow me on Instagram. We have a lot of fun on Instagram at Jennifer Cramer-Miller.
Wonderful. My viewers and listeners also know that if you can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmiller@lifeology.com, and I'll link it with Jennifer Cramer-Miller and her book, Incurable Optimist, Living with Illness and Chronic Hope. Jennifer, thank you once again for being a wonderful guest today.
Oh, James, thank you so much. I had so much fun talking to you.